Welcome to Better Teaching, Only Stuff That Works, a podcast for teachers, instructional coaches, administrators, and anyone else who supports teachers in the classroom. This show is a proud member of the BE Podcast Network, shows that help you go beyond education. Find all our shows at bepodcastnetwork.com. I am Gene Tavernetti, the host for this podcast, and my goal for this episode, like all episodes, is that you laugh at least once and that you leave with an actionable idea for better teaching. A quick reminder, no cliches, no buzzwords, only stuff that works. I'm very excited today to have two guests to talk about something that continually learning more and more about, and I'm very interested in. And I need to talk to people who actually know something about it, and that is about AI in education. And I have two guests today. Our first is Nicole Davis, and she's a PK through 12 STEM and computer science teacher at Vassalboro Community School. She is author, national speaker, and a Harvard Project Zero Digital Thriving Fellow with more than 20 years of experience in education. Prior to returning to the classroom, she served as the emerging technology specialist for the Maine Department of Education, where she led statewide professional learning and developed Maine's AI guidance toolkit. Nicole is the co-author of EduProtocol's AI Literacy Edition and is passionate about helping educators thoughtfully integrate AI and emerging technologies to foster creativity, critical thinking, and student agency. Through her teaching, writing, and presentations, she empowers educators to create human-centered learning experiences that prepare students to thrive in an AI-powered world. She holds a master's degree in education and lives in Mid-Coast, Maine with her dog, Luna. Her co-author in the EduProtocol's AI Literacy Edition is Kate Meyer. Kate is a veteran high school English teacher and instructional innovation coach at Mount Desert Island High School in coastal Maine. Kate is a national board certified educator with dual master's degrees in educational leadership and literacy. Kate is a fellow with Harvard's Project for Digital Thriving Fellowship for the 26-27 academic year, and as co-author of the EduProtocol's Field Guide, AI Literacy Edition, she speaks nationally about the mindful and intentional use of AI in education. Beyond her school walls, Kate co-founded Two Maine Teachers, a consulting partnership with Nicole that delivers practical professional development in AI for educators. When I met these two, I learned a lot, and I'm thinking you are going to also. I think you're going to like this one. Hi, Kate and Nicole. Welcome to Better Teaching, Only Stuff That Works.
How are
Thank
you?
you for having us.
Oh, gosh, it's a pleasure. And talking about AI, it is like something new every day. You know, the last time I had somebody on to talk about EduProtocols and AI was Adam Moeller, and he made a comment like, in 3 weeks, all of this will be different. You know, all of this is going to change in 3 weeks. So hopefully you guys can catch us up a little bit, because we don't say I'm going to look something up in the internet. I'm going to Google it. I'm going to, and it's kind of the way AI is now. Nobody knows what we're talking about, but we all say it. So when somebody asks you about AI, either in general or in education, how do you guys talk about it? And whoever wants to go first.
I think the simple answer about the AI that we're generally being asked about, which is generative AI, is that it is AI, it's technology that can generate an output. So it can recognize patterns, it can make predictions, and then it can generate language, or it can generate images. That's the AI that everyone's kind of asking us about right now, because of course AI is deeply embedded in almost everything that we do daily. So I think right now what people are really interested in is generative AI and what that means going forward.
I was gonna say too, I think when you talk about it within the classroom, or they know that you've written a book about it or whatever, they think you're all rainbows and butterflies. So I'd say the other piece of that is telling them that there's a balance with it, right? That it's not good or bad, that we've got to find somewhere in the middle.
So generative AI, you described that. So what is another term to describe other uses, or just so that people would have an idea what that would be called?
Yeah, well, so it's important to know that AI has been around for a while. And Kate and I both get when we do sessions like, well, I'm not using AI, right? And like if you held your phone up in front of your face or you drove here today, that's also AI technology. And it is all blending together, but that predictive AI is the stuff that's been around. It's looking at existing data and making predictions from that versus generating something new and looking at those patterns to generate something new.
So, talk about how, could you, each of you talk about how you got to become interested or involved with this aspect of AI and its impact that it has and will continue to have on education?
I was working for the State Department of Education in a role that they have for educators called the Distinguished Educator. And in our state, what our DOE does is they will hire educators out of the classroom. They'll buy out their contracts for 2 years. You get to work for the Department of Education on whatever the special project is that they have open. And then you go back to your classroom at the end of 2 years. So I had just come out of the COVID year. I had just done hybrid teaching and virtual teaching. And I thought this is a good moment to step back and take stock of where I am in education right now. I took the distinguished educator position. And in my second year in that role, ChatGPT came out in November. And it came out with no warning. And it just became my job in the role that I was in to learn everything that I could about generative AI. And at the time, it was really just Chat GPT in that particular moment, and to talk with educators in the field about what that might mean for education. So I had a whole year where I was really just focused on learning generative AI, thinking about what that meant for education, and talking with educators about it. So I was really lucky to be in the role that I was in the time that I was in, because I just really got to take that deep dive into what that meant. And then Nicole joined us.
Yeah, so I also was a distinguished educator. Again, I was an opportunity to do professional development, and I lucked out because so it's they do 2 years, and the two cohorts overlap. So Kate and I overlapped for a year, and then because it was so much further on, I was like, keep me. I want to stay in this role. And it's funny because at first, like when I first asked, it was my second year, and it was probably November, and you're already thinking about the end when you're headed back to the classroom and what that looks like. And I was like, you guys probably need someone. And they're like, nah. And then come February, they were like, do you want to stay on as the emerging technology specialist? And absolutely. And so I got to go further. And I can actually, I think a magic moment for us, and I can picture it, was we did our state tech conference, Actum, and we did a presentation, and it was lots of people came, and I can remember sitting with Kate afterwards and saying, like, let's do something with this. Like, let's write a book. Let's do this something, because we were both so excited about it.
So you were so excited about it. You had worked together. This was several years ago, right? So you started doing presentations. So how is what you present on now different than what you were doing originally?
It's been such an I was just thinking about that today. It's been such an interesting evolution, really, because we started with our excitement about AI and its implications for the classroom. So we would often do, tools and, creative challenges and, critical thinking challenges. And it was really about using AI in the classroom. And our work has really shifted and I would say grown into the human framework for mindful and intentional use of AI, which is it's just such a big growth moment from being excited about AI and wanting to try things out to really slowing down and thinking about how we use this tool intentionally and mindfully. So we've grown up with the tool, I think, which has been an interesting evolution and a really exciting one too.
So you mentioned the human framework. What people don't know until they read your book, unless they've been in one of your trainings, is an acronym. What is the human framework as you describe it?
So it is really a framework for intentional use and being mindful about your use. Again, back to that balance, right? Not going all the way to banning it or not going to using it all the time for everything. So human stands for H is halt, where you're really pausing and thinking about, should I use AI for this? Um, uh, U is for utilize. My brain it's 6 o'clock.
You.
My brain is kind of crazy right now.
Yeah.
U stands for utilize. So thinking about like the prompting, right? And how we're using it, but not just the prompting, the tool. How are we utilizing this so that it's not replacing what we're doing? We're not cognitive offload. We are really thinking about intentional use. And then M stands for monitor, where we're thinking about monitoring for accuracy and bias, and how does that play a role, and how do we mitigate some of that. A stands for authenticate, where we're thinking about authentic uses and really giving clear expectations around that. And what does it look like in the classroom? And then the last piece is really the reflective piece, note. Thinking about how have I used this? How do I want to use it again? Do I want to use it the same way? Do I need to disclose that I've used it? So again, just overall that intentional use, a process in order to do that. And you can give kids a list to say, like, you can use it for this but not this, and not this. But what happens when they get to a point where something's not on that list? We've got to give them some judgment pieces so that they know any use. Should I use it? Should I not?
It's interesting as a person who got involved with tech after I met Carippo, after I met John Carippo. And I went to one of his trainings, and I had never even designed a slide. Okay, because I had a guy. Well, actually, it was a woman, but I had somebody do it. I had never done it, and I sat next to somebody, and very nice young teacher, and she was, until I just stopped asking her because I realized how much I was bothering her and interrupting her. And then I worked on it. Oh, I'm pretty good at this now. And then I went to the next training, and the next training said, well, we're not using that platform anymore. We're going to use this one. And we're going to, and not being a tech person. And I always know who the tech people are in the training because they have all their stickers on their computer, and I wasn't one of them. So how do we get across to those folks, or who, because you don't want to just be talking to the people with the stickers on the computer. So how do we do that? How do you talk differently to them? How do you get them on board?
I have a secret weapon, which is a very specific tool. And I don't necessarily promote tools, but my secret weapon is a tool called Magic School, which it's an AI platform that is built by educators for educators. So I think that's really important when we're looking at what tools are we going to use in education. I think that we need to look at tools that are made by educators for educators, because we have very specific use cases. And the people who made this particular tool made it with safety in mind, made it with environmental concerns in mind, made it with copyright issues in mind when it comes to image generation. They just have really worked hard to kind of do as much as they can right and ethically with this tool, and then made it as easy to use as possible. So there's a very low ceiling entry point to this tool. It's very easy to use. It's very intuitive. And so when I encounter educators, and I still do all the time, who have never used AI before, that's my secret weapon. I'm like, oh, well, let me show you this one platform. I don't start with, if I'm working with people who haven't used AI, I don't start with Chat GPT or with Gemini or with Claude or any of those big large language models. I start with that kind of secret weapon that was designed for specific use cases.
I think making sure that we meet teachers where they're at, and Kate's describing those situations and those scenarios where they're at. And so making sure that we're not coming in and it's not like, okay, tech people, like, they're not everyone's a tech person. And
Yeah.
so understanding that you've got to have different entry points. And then along that same line, and I'm gonna repeat myself again, I've gotten so much feedback about the balance of it. When you come in and it's like, we're going to use AI all the time, it's everything, da da da. Like, that's not what this is. It has to be a balance. And Kate, when she uses it in her classroom, that's she's able to say, like, I'm not using it 24/7, right? And so when teachers hear that, it's kind of like a sigh of relief of like, oh, I don't have to use it all the time. It's not everything all the time. And it changes their perspective. And you can actually watch, like when we do a session, you can kind of watch them come in like a little up in arms, and then they just relax as they go with as they hear the human framework and understand that we're considering all these different pieces.
Well, it
Yeah, and
is. Yeah, go ahead, Nick. Go ahead, Kate.
I was going to say, as much as I talk about AI in education, when I really look at exactly what I'm doing in my own classroom, I'm using AI 4 or 5% of the time. The rest of the time, we're not using AI. I was just talking with some colleagues and I said, oh, yeah, the poetry unit. Yeah, we don't use AI at all in the poetry unit. So there's 4 weeks out of my 18 weeks where it doesn't, it doesn't even cross our mind to use AI because we just have chosen not to use it in that unit, right? So it's really thinking about that purposeful and intentional use, and it isn't just using it because it's new and novel.
So you mentioned your use, maybe 5%, and that you teach high school. Nicole, you work TK through whatever. Is there a difference in the grade levels where we're introducing the AI use to teachers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, it's interesting because it's a little controversy. Do I use this with younger kids or not? And there's
I'm
some
sorry, I'm
platforms.
sorry, I'm sorry, Nicole. I have to disagree with you. I don't usually do this. There's not a little
Oh,
controversy.
yeah,
There's a
yeah,
lot of
there is a lot
controversy.
of controversy. I agree. I agree. And so the question is like, do you use it with young kids or not? And so there are a couple platforms that's like you always want to check safety. That's the first thing. We want to make sure, what is it collecting? Is it okay with all the laws that are out, FERPA, COPPA, all those things? Is it okay in our districts? That's number one. The second piece is really thinking about what's your intention. So if I'm thinking about my young kids, they've got to be aware, right? And if we think about something as simple as Alexa, right? How many young kids, and I'm thinking young, think that that's a human? And that's a problem, right? So there has to be an awareness piece that we teach kids. And that doesn't necessarily have to be that they're using a tool, but using things like teachable machines or AI for Oceans, which is from they just changed from code.org to code AI. Tools that are teaching them how these things are learning, how they're set up on data, so that they understand that something like Alexa is not AI. And I think you can easily adjust that human framework so that it is for younger grades. And maybe you're not just talking about AI, but you're halting before we are using any type of technology. And should I, watch a video for this, or should I, read an article, or should I grab the iPad? And then figuring out again, you utilizing it, monitoring. We still have to monitor for accuracy and bias and all these things, right? So using that human framework, even in younger grades. So the piece about using the tool, I think that's going to be individualized and school based. I've seen some great uses. I've used it with second graders where they read a book and then they got to talk to the character and talk about comprehension. Like you knew whether those kids knew that or not, because they were quick to be like, this character would not say that, or this character would, right? And then they had in the engagement, right? It was Humphrey the hamster and that whole series, and they created these hamsters afterwards and talk about engagement. It just was a really great lesson. So I think it comes back to that intentionality and really thinking about the purpose. And I think right now the conversation around tech, we have to come back to what is the learning. And even with AI, what do we want kids to learn? And then can the tech enhance that?
I want to go back to something you said, because I think you two have a lot of knowledge about this, and we're using, like, I think, a multiple meaning word when you said safety, because normally safety, and AI, you think of, all the things we read about teenagers, and they're having these digital friends, but that's not what you're talking about. You were talking about more like collecting data. Is that how you were describing safety? Could you talk a little bit more about that? Because
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody even thinks about that when they're
Yeah.
using AI.
Yeah, I think, I've done a lot of teaching trainings, and when I think about this and I think about the classroom, we get what, 5 minutes at the beginning of the year, a little video or whatever about FERPA and COPPA. And then what happens is we find this cool new tech tool, right? And then our tech people tell us we can't use it. And you're like, what? You're just making it harder for us. And it's not because they don't want us to use it, it's because we have to follow certain rules so that whatever's being collected for students is safe. And part of that also is not putting things into AI. So that personal identifiable information. And I think there's a lot of questions around data that we don't talk about, right? So when we think about data, our picture is included in data. And when you think about Facebook, how many people have gone ahead and made themselves cute little Disney princesses, right? And that's great. As an adult, if you want to put your picture into AI, go for it. Make yourself a Disney princess. But we can't do that with our kids' pictures because that is a set of data and it's going to be training off of that. So those are all pieces that go into this, and understanding what you're putting in the machine is data. No matter whether it's a prompt, whether it's your picture, whether it is anything. So we want
Okay.
to be very careful.
I'm a little dense here. What
Yeah.
makes it unsafe? What makes it unsafe if you're doing something in the classroom? Kids are doing something in the classroom on some platform.
So I think about, I'll expand on what Nicole said, because I also want to add voice. Nicole talked about, it's not just our, it's our prompt, it's our images, it's our voice. I use my voice with my chat GPT, but I had to stop and think about whether or not I was willing to give up that privacy, because what we put into the machine is potentially being stored in the machine. And so you have to think about all the data that we give out all the time, that's all over the place in everybody's system, and how often those things get hacked. Is what we are putting into AI, if we're using ChatGPT or Claude or whatever it is that we're using, if one of those eventually gets hacked, if that information gets out, would you be okay with that information being out in the world? And if not, then you shouldn't be doing that with your large language model, whatever it is that you are
Yeah.
choosing to use. And we have to think about that level of safety, because we don't know if this information is going to get out or not. It could.
It's interesting that you said, they might be hacked. My inference is that you think otherwise it's okay that they have it, that you're trusting the people, you're trusting ChatGPT, you're trusting all of these large language models with it. No, okay. People can't see you, but you're shaking your heads and laughing. Okay,
No,
just
yeah, I
yeah,
don't. With my own use of AI, I use it for professional use with no personally identifying information. It does know my first name, and it does know that I live in Maine, but it doesn't have any other information on me other than that. Um, and I'm very aware of what I'm putting into it, and what I'm not. And the reason that I decided to put my voice into it, that I personally was okay with that. But again, that's part of the human framework, is understanding the intentional and mindful use of AI so that you can make those decisions on your own. I know my voice has already been collected in other places already. So I felt like that probably for me was okay safety wise. But that's why we have to talk to students and to educators about the mindful and intentional use of this tool, because our students don't know these things, right? They don't know that if they use their voice in Chat GPT, that it's probably being recorded and stored somewhere, and eventually could that become a privacy issue? It might be. And so we need to teach our students and the people we work with that we have to think about these things all the time.
Well, and I think it's a risk analysis. So when I think about like say using my credit card, right? There might be a reputable store that I'm like, yep, good, cool, I'll use that, or online, something. Whereas there's other places that like you buy something and you're like, I have the chance of giving my information and it's not. So you have to kind of analyze that risk, and make choices around that. And there are laws for our students that we have to make sure that we follow so that their data is protected.
Okay. Um, Wanted to talk a little bit about something that came up when I was in one of your sessions, and I think it was you, Kate, said very excitedly, as you as you do, talked about, well, I don't, and you started talking about Chat GPT and Claude and Gemini, and so okay, I'm a novice, so what do I need to know? A novice educator, what do I need to know about the differences, and why would I ask Claude, when do I use you? Am I going to get a real answer? Or
It's so interesting because they're all programmed, ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini and Grok and Poe and all the others that are out there. They're all programmed to behave certain ways, and they all behave a little bit differently. And so I started with ChatGPT because that's what came out, and so that's the one that I've really stuck with. Um, and I would say compared to most everybody else, I'm probably a heavy AI user. I have just started branching out into other large language models 4 years later, essentially. So I've tried Gemini a lot this past year because it became embedded in my workspace through my district. So we have Gemini, and I like Gemini because it is embedded in my Google workspace, and so I can ask my chatbot questions about email, or questions about my calendar, or questions about my Google Classroom, and it's all integrated. So if I'm doing school specific work, I might turn to that tool instead of ChatGPT. I've just last week started trying Claude out a little more seriously than I have in the past, and I thought the output was quite nice. It just had a different tone to it, and so I thought, oh, so for some different tasks, I might turn to Claude once in a while. I would say that that's not the usual use. That's not how most educators are working. They're not going down that rabbit hole like I do, and so I would say pick one and try it out and stick with it for a little while and figure out what you like and don't like about it. And then when you start to feel really confident, try another one. And what I always suggest to people who are ready to try another one to do is take a prompt and put it in the one that you've been using that you like, and then take the same prompt and put it in one that you're new to, and see what the difference in the output is. Compare them, because they do have different training on the back end, and you might find that you prefer one over the other, and you might go, this is too overwhelming and I'm sticking with one tool, and that's fine too. That's my recommendation.
And I would come back to that, like tech use in your schools. Your schools are gonna have different tech uses based on, like, their rules and things like that. Every school's a little bit different. So asking, what can I use with my school computer, with my email address? You can choose, like, you can do Kate's process at home, right, with your email, but also knowing like what can you and can't you put in there that's from school. So being careful of those pieces are going to be important as well.
And I think that it's important to note too, I don't know, a few years ago, there were 1,000 tools for educators. And as the years have gone by, they've gone by the wayside, or they've gotten swallowed up by bigger ones. And I would say there are fewer that the tech people, Jean, like you mentioned, that the tech people focus on at this point. I would say there's probably a handful that kind of keep coming up in places that I am in, spaces that I am in, where we are having these conversations. So that's good news, because it takes some of that load off of educators to feel like they have to learn 1,000 tools, because it was very overwhelming when all of those tools started appearing on the scene for educators. And so now it's less overwhelming. And that being said, because I'm a big proponent of find a tool that works for you and stick with it for a little bit, I'm also a big proponent of trying out a couple of tools that are maybe different from each other, so that you can see the possibilities. Because I think that's a sticking point when I talk with educators who only see generative AI as a tool for cheating. It's because they haven't spent time with it to see and imagine all the other possibilities that there might be for this tool. And that's not to negate, the cheating issue. Of course, our students are using it. It reduces friction and makes cheating very fast. I used to have to walk to the local bookstore and spend 99 cents to buy Cliff Notes. And then I had to walk home and then I had to read Cliff Notes. And then there was a lot of friction in my cheating process.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
AI has taken that out. And it's just filled with possibility too. And the more time you spend experimenting with it as an educator, I think the more possibilities you see in it.
Yeah, we often tell our teachers to break the tool, meaning go in there and act as a student. Kate says, channel your naughtiest student, right? And put in the things that they might put in that, like, I don't want to work today, and see what happens, so that way you can make that judgment call as an educator and see what they're going to get. And also see, what's popping up on my end as a teacher. Do I get to see, things flagged if certain things are said, or, what happens, so you can really get an understanding of the tool.
Well, two clarifying questions for me. The first one is, you mentioned, try different things and, see what you like. Are there criteria that you have for looking at it because you're a user, or is there general criteria you might share with folks to make some judgments about which they use?
It's really task dependent. So it really depends on what I'm hoping to get from the output. For example, if I'm hoping to get something factual and I'm hoping to get a source attached to an answer, I go to Perplexity AI because that tool is
Is that
built
the
the right.
fourth one you mentioned? That's the fourth one you
Sorry.
mentioned, Kate. See what you're doing to me?
One. But if I'm looking for factual research, that's where I go. And I
Okay.
still have to evaluate the sources. I still have to read the sources. I still have to do that work. But it does it helps with some of the initial gathering of sources. If I'm doing creative work, I go to Chat GPT, although Claude might become my go-to the more I use it. Again, if I'm doing like school-based Google Classroom, email situations, then I'm in Gemini because all of that is attached. So the more you play with them, the more you'll discover that you might like one for a particular task over another. And again, it's okay if you just stick with Gemini because that's what your school gave you and that's what's in your school workplace. Gemini is fantastic. There's nothing wrong with it. It gives you great outputs. So it just depends on how much time you want to spend in the exploration of it.
It's time you want to spend saving time.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So is there a place to go? So again, not to give you a hard time, but so we mentioned 4 different spaces, platforms, whatever you want to call them. What should I call them? Platforms?
I call them large language models, platforms.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So we talked about, is there a place, can I trust going to one of them to tell me, what they're best at?
Oh,
and where should I go? Yeah.
You can, but then you have to test it because they're going to answer you. They're going to give you a positive answer no matter what. They're not going to say, I'm really bad at such and such. They'll tell you what they're good at. And you really do have to test it. But I have done that. I go to ChatGPT, compare what you can do to Gemini to Perplexity, put it in a chart and let me see it. And then you can ask it questions. But again, you can't trust the answers out of pocket. You still have to do some exploration on your own.
Well, and these tools are sycophantic. So what that means is that, they're gonna tell you what you want to hear, and you have to know that. They're really confident about it. So, everything I put into ChatGPT, it makes me feel real good. Nicole, that's a great idea, right? So we have to know that, and we have in the book too, we have a prompting framework that we use, and really you can use any prompting framework, but what that does is it gives you better outputs. So part of our prompting framework is really that test piece. So at the end saying, be critical of yourself and tell me something that's wrong with this output, and asking those questions back and forth. So it's more of a collaborative process than just like one and done. And even then, it's not just I can use this output and go. I have to check things and I have to use my best judgment and go through that process of vetting it.
Okay. The other question that I had, Kate, is that you mentioned in one of your answers, you say, I like Gemini, I like my chatbot. What's a chatbot? What does that mean?
So at the very beginning, you asked, I think, what AI was. I think we started off by talking about generative AI that generates an output. The way that it generates an output is through the back end of it, which is called a large language model. The large language model is really the engine behind everything. So the large language model is what is working behind it to help make these predictions and understand patterns. And the way that we interact with a large language model is through a chatbot. So we humans are chatting with a chatbot that's calling upon this large language model in the background. And when it generates an output, that's what makes it generative AI. So our chatbots are ChatGPT, and Magic School has a chatbot called Raina, and there's Claude, and you know, all of those. So that's how we're interacting with the large language model that runs in the background.
Okay. And so I'm trying to think back to the session that I was in with you, and you're talking about training your chatbot for specific activities. It's like it's stored. It's like you could call on it to do a certain task. Am I right about that?
Are you talking about when we shared the gems that we had trained for tasks?
I don't know. I was one of the 4 or 5 you mentioned that it was over my head, you know.
So Gemini has little chatbots that you can program to do specific tasks. So for example, in the workshops, we gave Gemini gems to the participants that were trained on helping you create that task that we worked on in the workshop. So we gave it information on the back end in that large language model, and then you interacted with it through the chatbot, which gave you the output. And so lots of chatbots have those little features built in. So Gemini has gems and ChatGPT has GPTs. They all have their own little bots that you can make. The other piece that we haven't talked about yet, and this is becoming more prevalent, and I just tried my first one out this weekend, is agentic AI. Which is, it's a whole new world. And so this is where we are moving from generative AI that gives us an answer or can carry out a task to an agent that can actually plan, use tools, take multiple steps, check on what happened, and then continue working toward whatever goal you gave it. And it does that almost autonomously. So I'll give you an example. With this weekend, I Google searched car services near me, and there's now an AI agent built into that search that I can click on. And so it asked me, what's wrong with your car? And I said, oh, it needs new brakes and rotors. Great. It's going to call local car places, local to me, and it's going to ask for estimates to get my brake pads and rotors replaced. It wanted to know when I'm available. Do I need this in the next 48 hours, this week, next week? I gave it a bunch of answers and then closed Google. And today I got an email that included information from 5 to 8 local shops with the estimates. So what happened is the agent took all the information I gave it on Saturday, and then Monday morning, when all these places open, called them and spoke to them on my behalf and got estimates, and then collected those estimates and sent them to my email. And so now I have a list of body shops in the area and all of their estimates for that car work.
Did they mask your gender so you
Um,
didn't have that problem?
Yeah, I have no idea how the chatbot sounded. It did say that it would use my name, but not give any contact information. So it probably said something like, I'm calling on the behalf of Kate Meyer to find out, da, 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 da. And it looks like, I said to Nicole, it'll be interesting to see how many, local places hang up on this bot. But it looks like everybody it called gave it an answer. So,
well, I'm sure a bot answered, right?
yeah, it might have been. It might
I
have
mean,
been. Yeah.
I had this vision as you're talking about this. So you go to a large language model, and there are all of these little specialty things. It's almost like a coach saying, Davis, you're in, and you're shaking your head. So it's kind of like that, a kind of a specialty thing, sending a left-hand reliever. Um, uh, so this is okay. We've talked about some of the things that are in your book, but we haven't specifically talked about the book. And one of the things that I was so impressed with, the sessions that I went to with y'all was that you were teaching students how to do some of the things that you talked about, how to evaluate what they're getting. And never hear about that. We always hear about the cheating. So what are some of the things that you teach kids to do to evaluate this tool, these AI tools?
Well, and this is AI literacy when we teach kids about how they work, how to evaluate outputs. And it's important, right? Because our kids are going to do it anyways. They're going to use this. They are using this. So let's take the time to teach them. One of our favorite edu protocols is shoe bias, where we're really evaluating bias in images. And you could do it in text too, but we've chosen to kind of start with images. We call it shoe bias because we start with shoes. And we start with shoes because it's not heated or charged. You can look at, three different pairs of shoes and say that the AIs have generated and say, oh, well, like this is what's missing. And, they didn't consider this perspective. And what about this? And the kids can do that. And I'd say the kids can do that at a very young age, right? So they understand and can start to see that, like, when we generate images or generate text, that there's going to be missing perspectives. And then how do we evaluate and go further to say what perspective needs to be represented? So they're going in and they're developing or creating the images of a shoe that they want represented, whether that is something that they relate to, whether it's something that's we've seen some made up shoes. That there's all kinds of things that could be part of this conversation. And I would argue that it's a conversation that we don't necessarily normally have in our classrooms. And there's lots of places where AI opens up those opportunities for those things. And this is something, we start with shoes, but it could be that in science class, I always think about, I always use the example of photosynthesis as a science teacher. And when I think back to teaching about photosynthesis, I taught what was outside our window, right? Like those are the leaves we're talking about. But are there other areas that are, other leaves or other plants that are happening with photosynthesis? And so those misconceptions can be pulled out and you can have a conversation about AI bias.
One of the other things, one of the other workshops was on prompting, which is really important. I talk to people all the time who are like, well, I tried AI, but I wasn't really impressed by it. And I often say, well, what was your prompt? Like, what were you asking it to do? And they said, oh, I asked it to write me a lesson plan on photosynthesis, and it did, but it wasn't very good. And I said, well, what did you do next? And they were like, nothing. I didn't like it. Because people they don't know the possibilities around prompting. And I think that's where we get into this cheating conversation too, because we think we know it as an answer machine. Give me a lesson plan on photosynthesis. Give me the answer, write my essay, solve this problem for me. But if you really do prompting well, you're thinking alongside it and having it kind of deepen everything for you. So you might say, here's what I wrote, or here's my interpretation. What am I missing? What am I overlooking? Or here are three arguments that I have give me 3 counter arguments. That way you can think about it and strengthen your own work, right? Ask me questions that would make my argument stronger. So we're moving from that idea of all it does is help you cheat to it can actually help you identify misconceptions, missing pieces, things that you've overlooked in your own work. I'm working on a presentation right now, and I delivered the entire presentation verbally to my chatbot, and I said, imagine you're somebody in the audience who feels a certain way. What would your response be to this presentation I just gave? Because it can help me see what I'm missing or what I have too much of. I'm not having it write my speech for me. I didn't say write the speech. I said, here's my work. What am I missing? How can I improve this? And that thinking that goes into that is much deeper than just prompting it to give me an answer.
I mean, I was in that workshop, with you when you were talking about prompting, and you was almost like you were a nag. You were negative. It wasn't, it's just like, okay, but what about this? What about this? And I think, that there's some analogous work for students and for the teachers, because the teachers can be just as lazy. And I say that with all deference. I mean, they got a lot to do. They're not given a curriculum that, and so they get this. I used something today. I was checking it out. Somebody had told me that this platform had improved quite a bit, and I was very disappointed at the result today. I would have, parts of it, yeah, but other parts of it, absolutely not. So that was, and that's in your book, right? How to do prompts. There are, how often do you? This is one of the questions that I had for, your EduProtocol book. You have lessons in there that really teach about AI, like you say, AI literacy. So how often would you need to teach a lesson on bias, or would that be something that you might revisit based on content that students might not be that familiar with?
That's one of the things that I think makes EduProtocols work for this type of content, is that it can be repeated. So that we can look at bias in a couple of different places. I have my students for 18 weeks. We're on a semester schedule. So in a semester, I look at bias with my students in AI outputs 3 times. And so it's just kind of 3 quick hits with the EduProtocol on bias. And what I say to educators is, you don't have to teach every EduProtocol in that book. If you and your colleagues are all talking about AI literacy, even just a little bit, and everybody mentions AI literacy 2 or 3 times over the course of your semester, it builds, and students pick up on those connections. And over the course of their education, they will hear about AI bias. They will hear about great prompting tips. They will hear about different ways to reflect on their use, right? They'll hear those things, and it will build. So again, the feeling that people might have is like, oh, well, Kate, is talking about AI all the time in her English class. And I'm really not. I'm getting small hits where it makes sense in the curriculum.
Yeah.
Well, and it creates a mindset. Kate, will you tell your story about the girls with and it's in the book, but the sparkles and things like that? Because that's what we really want. We want them doing it on their own.
Yeah, it was the first time I encountered AI bias in a pretty obvious way. So my students were making podcasts, which is a very English teachery assignment, and they were trying to come up with a title for their group name, what they wanted their group name to be, and they were just spinning their wheels and taking way too much time coming up with this group name. And I said, why don't you turn to your chatbot and just brainstorm with that, see if it can give you a group name that you like. So they get quiet and they get on the chatbot and they're brainstorming with the chatbot. And I just hear this eruption at the back of the classroom, and they're like, this is garbage. This is crap. We can't believe it. And I'm like, what is going on back there? And they're like, every answer came out glitter, sparkle girl power, pink puffiness. And I was like, well, what did you say to it? Like, what? because that didn't describe those particular students at all. And they said, well, we told it that we were 4 teenage girls making a podcast about the American dream. And I was like, well, wow. And my first response was to be like, oh, well, it was your prompt. But then I realized, I mean, it was the prompt. And what we were seeing was the bias that the machine had about who teenage girls are, right?
Yeah.
And it was just reflecting that back to them. And so he just had a great, just a really organic conversation again that just fit in the curriculum in the moment. 10 minutes, and then that was that, and we all understood, and we moved forward with new understanding.
Well, another example of use of AI that I read about that you two wrote about was, using and then I'm not going to name the platforms because I can't remember them anyway. But where they give feedback to students on the writing, the teacher puts in a rubric, and I've heard teachers say, you'll find out my bias. I've heard teachers say, well, keep trying until you get it, and the kids will, the kids see it as a game to get to the multiple points. And if that was me, I'm thinking, okay, what did they tell you? What did your chatbot tell you? Do you agree with it? Now make the change. And why do you agree with it? And it's got to be something I just taught you or that you've learned how to write. And that's one of the things that you talk about in there as well. Uh, so uh, uh, so we've talked about, so that was one thing that you talked about. You talked about bias. You talked about uh, the last thing you just talked about. What other things in regards to AI literacy do students need to know about?
Well, I think in relation to what you just said is what's missing for me in that story that you just told about writing feedback and AI is that students are pausing and then reflecting and doing that metacognitive piece. And that's the final piece of the human framework for its note. How do you note your use of it? How do you reflect on your use of it? So that you are stopping and doing that thinking about your thinking as opposed to being focused on the potential gamification of writing, just trying to get those points or trying to
Right.
trying to make the game piece move, right? It's really the learning comes in when you stop and you say, what worked for me? What choices did I make that I am proud of? I like to ask my students what they rejected and why they rejected it, because I think it's really important to teach them, because it's not natural, which I think is really interesting to observe, but it's not natural for them to reject feedback from the chatbot, which I think is really interesting. My juniors had a hard time before I taught them that it was okay to reject the feedback. I had a student say, oh, well, it told me I should do this, so I guess I should do that. And I was like, whoa, hold on.
Right.
Just because the chatbot said you should do that doesn't mean that you should do that. You are still in control. You are in the lead of this process. And I think that it is essential that we teach our students that they are in control of this tool. It's going to take slowing down and thinking about what's working and what's not working, and what they're listening to and what they're choosing not to.
And I think this is another one of those opportunities where, we don't necessarily teach kids how to take feedback. And I think even as adults, I think about when we got notes back from our editors and we were going through and we are like, yeah, yeah. And then we had something that we're like, oh, and it's like, we're the writers, so we can choose this, right? And kids don't necessarily have that agency always because, oh, the adult said it, so I got to do it. Well, let's teach them about feedback. And here's another great opportunity to do that through AI.
It's I mean, there's just so much to learn, and there'll be more to learn tomorrow. And I'll go to, did you pass out stickers, by the way? I think you did, didn't you? You passed out stickers.
You did,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. So if a teacher just starting and they don't live in Maine and they can't see you, other than buying your book, what would you recommend?
So they can
Big-
visit us. We have a website, twomaineteachers.com. And then we have a Facebook page as well. And you can get to all of our socials from there. We're on LinkedIn. And we have like our shoe bias is there. Our human framework is in there. I think at the core of it, Kate and I are educators, and we want students to be able to do these things. We want to help teachers. And that's really at the core of things, who we are and what we want to do.
Awesome. Wow. Like I say, I could spend all day with you guys. But do you have any questions for me?
I have one for you.
Okay.
What's one thing that you've changed your mind over in the last year from the ed tech world?
Um, I think one of the things that you guys have talked about, and that is it's not all or, it's not all or nothing. It can be you can find your spots. Even in the EduProtocol world, there are people who are, they are very little digital. It's all paper and pencil, and you get the results. The thing that I haven't changed my mind about yet, and you guys didn't help me change, you just reinforced, and that is that the teacher still has to do the thinking. I mean, again, it's interesting. You work TK through 12, and that when you're working with your kindergarten teachers, they are so sweet, and then you work with the middle, our teachers, we're just like the kids. And so they don't say they're cheating, but they're saying, oh, I'm having my chatbot, doing this grading. They created that lesson plan for me. But they still have to be the boss. And that's the part that worries me, that you still, whether or not you continue to write your own lessons, you need to be able to do it, to be able to evaluate what it gave you. And that's my concern. That's my concern, and that hasn't changed. But uh, and the fact that we're seeing a whiplash against tech in classrooms just proves that we can take advantage of the tech, but kids don't have to be on devices all the time.
And I think that's exactly why we created the human framework, so that you're keeping the human in the loop always and in the lead.
In the lead, the human in the lead. All right. Thank you so much. Any final words? Any words of wisdom before we go?
I would argue try something. Like just try something. Put a prompt in, see what happens. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just see what it does. And don't be quick to give up on it.
You know, I, I need some advice from you guys. Alexa changed voices, right, lately, and she's way too friendly for me. Not that, and she keeps asking me, "Who am I talking to?" And it's been a month. What's your name? And I haven't given it to her yet. And so, so don't give it to her. Okay, all right.
Make up a name.
Yeah, I'll use my Starbucks name, something that she could spell.
Yeah.
All right. Guys, it has been wonderful, and I hope I run into you again soon. And thank you for being on Better Teaching, Only Stuff That Works.
Great. Thank you for having us. This has been
Yeah,
great.
absolutely. Thank you.
If you're enjoying these podcasts, tell a friend. Also, please leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. You can follow me on Blue Sky at G Tavernetti, on Twitter, X at G Tavernetti, and you can learn more about me and the work I do at my website, tesscg.com. That's TESSCG.com, where you will also find information about ordering my books, Teach Fast, Focused, Adaptable, Structured Teaching, and maximizing the impact of coaching cycles.